Carl wasn't bluffing when he said I'd regret it. A week after the gates went up, I was served papers. The HOA had filed for an emergency injunction, demanding that I remove the gates and restore what they called community access. They wanted the judge to believe that because they had used my road for years, they had some sort of permanent right to it. I wasn't intimidated. I showed up to court with a folder so thick it looked like I was defending a murder case. Deed copies, county records, the easement revocation documents, photographs of the road maintenance bills I'd personally paid. I was ready. The courtroom was small, the kind with squeaky wooden benches and a ceiling fan that hummed louder than anyone wanted to admit. On the left side sat the HOA board, about 7 of them, all dressed like they were auditioning for a reality show about suburban overlords. Carl sat in the middle, tie knotted too tight, face red like a man who'd never been told no in his life. Their lawyer shuffled papers and tried to look confident. I sat on the right with my wife, calm as could be. When the judge came in, everyone stood, and then the arguments began. The HOA lawyer started with a speech about community welfare and established precedent of use. He waved his arms like he was laying down the law. But when it was my turn, I didn't waste time. I held up the deed. Your Honor, this road has been in my family's possession for decades. The HOA has never paid a cent toward its upkeep. These are invoices from paving companies, snow removal crews, even utility line repairs, all paid by me. The association has no deed, no easement, no claim. Their signs are nothing more than trespassing. The judge flipped through my papers, nodding slowly. Then he looked at the HOA lawyer. Do you have proof of easement? The lawyer stammered. Well, no official easement, but they've used the road for years. Without permission? The judge interrupted. The lawyer cleared his throat. It was understood. The judge cut him off again. So they were trespassing. You could hear a pin drop. Carl's face turned a shade of crimson I didn't know was humanly possible. The judge leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, Case dismissed. This road belongs solely to the defendant. The HOA has no rights here, and if I hear of any further harassment or false fines, there will be penalties. Bang. Gavel down. Case closed. I walked out of that courtroom with my wife's arm hooked in mine, smiling ear to ear. Carl stormed past me in the hallway, muttering under his breath, but I didn't care. I'd just beaten them where it hurt most, the law. But the real war was only beginning. The gates were still up, the easements revoked, and the neighborhood was in chaos. Every morning, the same scene played out. Cars piling up at the gate, horns blaring, parents late for work, kids missing the bus, Amazon trucks circling like vultures. And every day, I sat on my porch sipping coffee, watching the show. Some neighbors tried to sweet-talk me. Others yelled curses from their windows, but none of them got through without my permission. One evening, Carl came storming up to the gate. He pressed the intercom button like he was trying to break it. His voice crackled through the speaker. You think you won, but this isn't over. The neighborhood will not stand for this. I leaned into the microphone. Carl, you lost in court. The judge made it clear. This road is mine and I control access. You don't like it? You can always take the long way around. His face twisted and he jabbed a finger at the camera. You're isolating yourself from this community. I grinned. Funny, Carl. I don't remember joining your community in the first place. Then I cut the feed and walked back inside. That night, as I replayed the day's events, an idea started forming. I had leverage now. Real leverage. I had something every single one of those homeowners needed, a faster way in and out of the neighborhood. And I was about to turn that leverage into money. The next week, I drafted up a letter. Polite, professional, even stamped with my own little logo for fun. It read, access permits now available. Monthly fee, $100 per vehicle. Apply with proof of registration. I made copies, slipped them into envelopes, and delivered one to every single house in the HOA territory. The reaction was priceless. Some laughed, some cursed, some crumpled the paper on sight. But when Monday rolled around and people realized that the only alternative was a 20-minute dirt road detour full of potholes and gravel dust, the applications started trickling in. Slowly at first, 2, then 5, then 10. By the end of the month, I had nearly 30 cars registered. $3,000 a month in pure profit, just for letting people drive on a road I already owned. My wife looked at me one evening as we counted the checks. "You really turned this into a business," I smirked. "If they want to play games, fine. But I'm the one writing the rules now." Carl, of course, refused to pay. He instructed his board members to do the same, calling my permits extortion. He even tried to organize carpools through the dirt road. But the board members cracked first. One by one, they came to me, sheepishly asking for permits because their spouses were tired of being late to work or dealing with dust coating their cars. And every time I signed another permit, I knew it was driving Carl insane. The man tried everything. He sent out HOA newsletters calling me a selfish obstructionist. He went door to door trying to rally people against me. He even had someone spray paint HOA Road Forever on one of my gates. But the cameras caught them, and the police issued a fine. The more he pushed, the more he lost ground. People were starting to whisper that maybe Carl had bitten off more than he could chew. And then came the night that changed everything. It was after another heated HOA meeting where Carl had stood up in front of everyone and declared that he would take back the road by any means necessary. I stayed home, but word traveled fast. When the meeting ended, several board members parked their cars along my road, deliberately leaving them overnight as some sort of protest, a statement that the road belonged to them. I saw them lined up from my porch, engines off, doors locked. They thought they were proving a point. What they didn't realize was that they'd just handed me the perfect opportunity. The next morning, I made a single phone call to the tow company I'd worked with before. They knew the drill. By sunrise, every single one of those cars had been hooked up, hauled away, and locked behind the gates of the impound lot. When the homeowners woke up, panic rippled through the neighborhood. People stumbled outside in their bathrobes, looking around, asking where their cars had gone. The HOA group chat exploded with frantic messages. And me? I was sitting on my porch again, coffee in hand, waving to the tow trucks as they rolled out. By noon, Carl was at my gate, pounding his fist against the steel, his voice cracking with rage. "You can't just steal people's cars!" he screamed. I pressed the intercom. "Not stealing, Carl. Enforcing private property rights." They parked on my road without permission. Signs were clear. Tow company did the rest. If they want their cars back, they can pay the impound fees. "You'll pay for this," he shouted. I chuckled. "Funny. I thought you already did." Because here's the kicker. The impound fees had to be reimbursed through the HOA's budget. Thousands of dollars, gone overnight. And when the next HOA meeting came and Carl announced a hike in dues to cover the costs, the neighborhood turned on him like wolves. That was the moment I knew the war wasn't just mine anymore. The HOA had fractured, the board was fighting with itself, and Carl was losing control. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. Welcome back, folks. Settle in, grab a drink, maybe a snack. Because this one isn't your average neighbor cut my lawn without asking story. This is about a real war between me, a regular homeowner who just wanted peace and quiet, and an HOA that thought they were the kings of the neighborhood. I'm going to tell you how they tried to steal my private road without asking, how they pushed and fined and harassed me into the corner, and how I responded in a way that made every single one of their cars vanish. And trust me, I don't mean I waved a magic wand. I mean, poof, gone, impounded at their expense. But before we get to that sweet part, let me back up and set the stage. I live in a quiet pocket of suburbia, not too far from the city, but far enough that the nights are dark and you can still hear crickets. My family's house sits on a larger than usual plot, and the special thing about it is the stretch of road that runs from the main street down to our driveway. It's not long, maybe a quarter mile, but it's private. Private as in deeded, maintained, and paid for by me and my family. Every crack in the pavement, every snowplow, every repair, we covered it. Nobody else. And honestly, I was fine with that. It kept things quiet, it kept strangers out, and it gave me a sense of independence most of my neighbors didn't have. See, the neighborhood behind my property grew over the years. Houses popped up, lawns appeared, and eventually the dreaded HOA formed. You know the type. Newsletter warriors, grass measuring committees, and a president who acts like he's running the Pentagon. But for the most part, I was outside their little kingdom. They didn't bother me, and I didn't bother them. Until one morning. It was a Saturday, cool and crisp, one of those mornings where the sun makes everything look sharper. I stepped outside with my coffee, ready to enjoy the quiet. But something looked off. At the entrance of my road, there was a brand new sign. Big, bold, shiny aluminum with black lettering. HOA property. No trespassing without permission. I froze. My coffee nearly spilled. I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me. I walked closer, and sure enough, the sign had been freshly installed, bolted into the ground with concrete. HOA property. I laughed at first. I thought, no way. No way would anyone actually think they could just claim my land. Maybe some idiot put the sign in the wrong spot. But then I noticed there was another one further down, and another one at the far end. 3 signs total. By the time I reached the last one, the laugh had turned into a slow boil of anger. That afternoon, I called the HOA office. The receptionist put me on hold for 20 minutes before transferring me to the president. And that's when I heard his voice for the first time. Carl. Carl spoke like he was reading from a script. Smooth, self-important, fake polite. "Hello, this is Carl, president of the Homeowners Association. How can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, this is my name. I'm calling because I found 3 HOA signs installed on my private road this morning. You need to come get them out now." There was a pause. Then Carl chuckled. "Ah, yes. That's not a mistake. The board voted to adopt that road as part of the community property. It's in everyone's best interest." I nearly dropped the phone. "Adopt? This isn't a stray kitten, Carl. That's deeded property. It belongs to me. You don't get to vote it into your little HOA empire." He had the audacity to sound smug. "Well, the community needs access. And frankly, it will be better managed under HOA rules. You'll just have to accept it." My jaw clenched. I could feel the heat rising in my ears. "Carl, let me make this crystal clear. That road isn't yours. It never will be. And if you don't get those signs off my land by tomorrow, I'm calling the police." And do you know what he said? "Go ahead. But you'll find the HOA has more authority here than you think." And then he hung up. Now, at this point, I thought it was just a dumb stunt. Maybe the HOA would back off once they realized I wasn't going to roll over. So I did the reasonable thing. I went to the county office, pulled out my deed, highlighted the section that clearly marked the road as mine, and sent copies to the HOA by certified mail. I thought, surely this will end it. 2 weeks later, I got my first violation notice. It was a bright yellow envelope, bold letters across the top. Notice of violation. Parking on HOA property. Inside was a fine, $500, for parking my own truck in front of my house. On my road, I saw red. My wife had to take the envelope out of my hands before I ripped it in half. I called Carl again. "What the hell is this? You fined me for parking on my property?" He didn't miss a beat. Once again, the board has adopted that road. Parking is restricted to approved vehicles. Yours wasn't registered. Registered? With who? With us. The HOA. As of now, all vehicles must be logged with the association. I swear. I could hear the smirk in his voice. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a power play. They weren't backing off. They were trying to bully me into submission. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stiff drink and laid it all out. My wife was worried. "Maybe it's easier just to pay the fine and move on," she said. But I shook my head. If I give in once, they'll own me forever. Today, it's $500. Tomorrow, it's $1,000. Then they'll say I can't park my truck at all. And after that, what? They decide they want the whole driveway? She sighed. So what are you going to do? I looked out the window at the stretch of asphalt I'd driven on for years. I'm going to remind them who really owns this road. The next week, I went back to the county office, but this time I wasn't just pulling records. I was filing paperwork. See, when you own a private road, you can grant easements, legal rights for others to use it. Over time, small allowances had been granted for utility companies, emergency vehicles, that sort of thing. But the HOA, they had no easement, none. so I filed to revoke any assumed right of passage for the HOA. From that moment on, legally they had zero right to use my road. The clerk raised her eyebrows when she stamped the papers. "You're going to have some angry neighbors." I smiled. "Good. That's the point." Within days, the HOA started sending more notices. Bigger fines, threats of liens. They even sent a letter saying they'd tow my truck if it was parked illegally on my own property again. But here's the thing. They didn't know I'd already made my next move. I'd contacted a local security contractor. I gave them my budget and my plan. And over the course of one weekend, my quiet little road turned into something entirely different. Brand new steel gates went up at both ends. Reinforced posts sunk deep into concrete. Keypads with entry codes. Motion-activated cameras watching every angle. It looked less like a suburban driveway and more like the entrance to a private estate. By Sunday night, the whole thing was locked down tight. Monday morning came, and oh boy, the chaos started immediately. Cars lined up at the gate, honking. Parents shouted out their windows trying to get kids to school. Delivery trucks idled with no way to get in. My phone buzzed nonstop. And then came the call from Carl. "You can't do this!" he barked. "You can't block the road. The community needs access." I took a slow sip of my coffee and let him rant. When he paused for breath, I said calmly, "Carl, this isn't community property. It's mine. You tried to fine me for using my own land. So now, no HOA member has permission to use it at all. Don't like it? Take me to court." There was silence on the other end, and then through gritted teeth he said, "You'll regret this." I hung up. And here's the thing. He wasn't entirely wrong. They did take me to court, but what happened in that courtroom only made things worse for the HOA. And it was the first domino in a chain of events that ended with every single one of their cars disappearing from my road. But that is a story for part 2. After that morning, when every board member's car was hauled away, the neighborhood was never the same. People who used to smile and wave at each other now crossed the street to avoid conversation. The HOA meetings turned into shouting matches, half the room blaming Carl for mishandling everything, the other half too afraid to openly challenge him but clearly doubting his leadership. The trust that had held the group together was gone. They weren't a community anymore. They were just a collection of angry neighbors stuck paying dues to fund a power trip. Carl tried to put on a brave face. He sent out long-winded emails, the kind that took 10 minutes to scroll through, filled with legal jargon and phrases like community spirit and preserving property values. He wanted to convince everyone that he was still in control. But the truth was obvious. He'd lost his grip. I could see it every time he drove past my gate. His jaw clenched so hard you'd think his teeth might snap. He couldn't stand that I'd beaten him fair and square. But the final straw came a few weeks later. One of the homeowners, an older gentleman named Mr. Willis, had been quietly building support to dissolve the HOA altogether. He went door to door, calmly explaining that they were wasting money on lawsuits, impound fees, and useless fines. More importantly, he pointed out that the bylaws allowed for dissolution if a majority of homeowners voted in favor. Carl didn't know it at first, but Mr. Willis was gaining traction fast. When Carl finally found out, he snapped. He showed up at Willis's house one evening, screaming on the porch so loud half the block heard it. "You're undermining everything I've built," he shouted. Willis, calm as ever, simply said, "Carl, this isn't your kingdom. We're tired of your nonsense." The confrontation ended with Carl storming off, but the damage was done. Word spread like wildfire, and the more Carl resisted, the more determined people became to cut him out. Meanwhile, I was still running my little road permit business. Every month, checks rolled in. Some people tried to fight it, but when faced with 20 extra minutes of potholes, they caved. By now, nearly everyone except Carl and his closest allies had paid up. The irony was delicious. The HOA was collapsing, yet I was pulling in more income from the mess they created. My wife teased me one night over dinner. "You should send Carl a thank you card." Without him, this would have never happened. The climax came on a stormy Thursday night. The HOA had called an emergency meeting to address the growing rebellion. I wasn't there, of course, but 3 different neighbors filled me in later. The meeting started tense and got worse by the minute. Carl tried to rally everyone, promising he had a plan to reclaim the road. But when pressed, he had nothing concrete. He blustered, ranted, waved his hands like a preacher, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Then Mr. Willis stood up, calm and collected, and announced that he had gathered enough signatures to force a vote on dissolving the HOA. The room erupted. Some cheered, others shouted, and Carl completely lost it. Witnesses told me he slammed his fist on the table, screaming that they couldn't betray him, that without the HOA, property values would plummet, that I would own them all. His voice cracked, and in that moment, even his allies realized he wasn't a leader. He was a desperate man clinging to power. The vote happened 2 weeks later. I watched from my porch as car after car rolled into the community center. People filed inside, whispered, argued, signed papers. By the end of the night, the results were official. By a strong majority, the HOA was dissolved. Carl had lost everything. I'll never forget the sight of him walking out of that building. Shoulders slumped, tie loosened, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single evening. He barely even looked at me when he drove past my gate. For the first time since this feud began, I saw something I never expected: defeat. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, the county records showed that the HOA's office building, ironically built on a lot partially financed by fines they'd collected, was now up for sale. It sat empty, a shell of Carl's failed empire. That's when the idea hit me, one so poetic I couldn't resist. I put in an offer, low but reasonable, and to my surprise, it was accepted. The day I got the keys, I walked through the front door of what used to be the HOA headquarters. The walls still had their old bulletin boards plastered with meeting notes and violation warnings. The carpet smelled like stale coffee and cheap cologne. I stood in the middle of the room, stretched my arms out wide, and laughed. The very place where Carl had once plotted against me now belonged to me. But I wasn't about to turn it into an office. Oh no, I had a better plan. I converted it into a private workshop and storage facility, and, for the finishing touch, I parked one of the old impounded cars right out front with a big sign that read, HOA Relic, Do Not Remove. Neighbors drove by and chuckled, shaking their heads. Carl must have driven past it every day, forced to see a monument to his own downfall. In the months that followed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood was quieter without the HOA breathing down everyone's necks. People landscaped their yards however they wanted, parked their trucks where they pleased, and painted their houses colors that made them happy. For the first time in years, folks actually seemed free. As for Carl, word spread that he'd sold his house and moved away. Some said he couldn't stand the humiliation. Others whispered he'd gone bankrupt after sinking so much money into legal battles. I didn't know for sure, and honestly, I didn't care. He was out of my life, and that was enough. Sometimes, when I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, I think back to the moment this all started. The day I found that ridiculous HOA road sign stuck in the ground at the edge of my property. They thought they could just take what was mine, no permission, no respect, just entitlement. And in the end, that arrogance destroyed them. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I ever feel guilty about being the guy who pulled the pin on the grenade that blew up an entire homeowners association. And my answer is always the same, not for a second. Because here's the thing, if you let bullies push you around, they'll never stop. But if you stand your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's messy, you show them something they can't handle, that they're not untouchable. I didn't just protect my road. I protected my freedom. And if that meant vanishing every one of their cars, tearing apart their little kingdom, and buying their old office just to rub salt in the wound, then so be it. They had their chance to play fair, and they chose war. I just happened to finish it better than they ever imagined. So the next time someone tries to tell you what you can and can't do with what's rightfully yours, remember this story. Remember that the loudest bullies are often the weakest when you stand up to them. And remember that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't just winning. It's building a life so good they have to watch from the sidelines. powerless to stop it. And as for me, every time I drive down my private road, past the gate that only I control, I smile. Because it's more than asphalt and gravel. It's a reminder that I didn't let them take it from me. They tried, they failed, and in the end, they vanished. Not my road, not my freedom, and certainly not me.